welcome back, everybody, to the Data Science Hangout. I'm Rachel. If we haven't met before, I lead customer marketing at Posit. I've learned from a friend at the Hangout that it might be helpful for me to let people know that Posit is actually the company formerly called Our Studio. Um, I had assumed that mistakenly that everybody knew that, so I just want to make sure that I add that in the beginning as well. So at Posit, we build enterprise solutions and open source tools for people who do data science with both R and Python. And so I'm joined by my lovely co-host here as well, Libby, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Libby. I work with Posit to do community management for the Data Science Hangout, and I'm also a data science mentor at the Posit Academy, where I help people learn R and Python to do their jobs better.
So happy to have you all joining us here today. If this is your first Data Science Hangout, this is our open space to hear what's going on in the world of data across all different industries, chat about data science leadership, and connect with others who are facing similar things as you. And we get together here every Thursday at the same time, same place. So if you are watching us as a recording on YouTube in the future and want to join us live in the future, there'll be details to add it to your own calendar below. At the Hangout, we're all dedicated to keeping this a friendly and welcoming space for everyone, and love hearing from you no matter your years of experience, titles, industry, or languages that you work in. I know people really enjoy connecting with other attendees here in the chat, so I'll encourage you, if you want to right now, to briefly introduce yourself and say hi. Maybe share your LinkedIn or include your role, something you do for fun. That chat is yours to use during the Hangout to connect with other people. Feel free to also share any open roles that your team may be hiring for too.
Yes, please. Share open roles, share your website, whatever you can. There are 3 ways that you can jump in and ask questions today, or just share your own experience or point of view. You can raise your hand on Zoom and we will call on you to jump in. You can put a question in the Zoom chat. Feel free to put an asterisk next to it, after it, before it. If you are someplace noisy or your mic doesn't work, you're not able to read it yourself, we'll read it for you. And then we also have a Slido link where you can ask questions anonymously, and that will be in the chat. I think Isabella has already posted it in the chat. Yeah, there we go. Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to be joined today by our co-host, Ralph Asher, who is the founder of Data Driven Supply Chain LLC. Hey, Ralph, I would love to get started with you just telling us a little bit about yourself, how you maybe got into data and supply chain. And I would also love to hear a little bit about what you do outside of work.
Great. Well, thank you first off, Libby and Rachel, for inviting me. This is a great opportunity to connect with the data community and just talk a little bit about the supply chain design and associated disciplines. So background, grew up in Indiana, in small town Indiana, went to hometown U, as I call it, studied physics, and about halfway through, I realized I wasn't that great at physics, so I joined the Marines after graduation. That's half a joke, but love the ability to understand how real life is connected to math, and so studied physics and wanted to serve my country. For 6 years after college, I was on active duty in the Marine Corps as a communications officer, where I led teams of technical Marines who were doing things like setting up radio networks and computer networks and things like that. Towards the end of that time, went back to school for operations research, which for those who are might be an unfamiliar term, operations research is the discipline of essentially problem solving using math with different disciplines of mathematics, optimization, statistics, some engineering, all mixed together towards solving problems. So went back to school, got my master's in that, moved to Minnesota and started working at General Mills, the food company, which is here, doing supply chain design. And what supply chain design is basically using those operations research techniques to inform where a company or an organization should have their manufacturing plants, where they should have their distribution centers, their warehouses, how products should ultimately flow to their customers. So worked there for a couple of years, then was hired to work at Target, which is located here also in Minnesota, and worked there for several years before starting my company doing consulting on supply chain design and inventory optimization and some related things. Outside of work, I like to run, I like to be active. Minnesota is great for that. Also have two small children and a minivan and a dog and a house. So kind of got the all my hands full as far as that goes. So.
Awesome, Ralph. Thank you. I was hoping, yeah, Rachel's saying I see some Target friends on here too. I think we've had Target supply chain friends join us in the past as well. I would love to hear a little bit about, for anybody who isn't aware of the type of problems that are solved in supply chain, would you mind giving us a little rundown or some background on the types of problems that you solve, maybe for a place like Target, and like what type of data you use to solve your problems?
Sure. So types of problems, one is what I alluded to earlier. So facility location, where should my distribution centers be? Where should my plants be? I'm also going to use some examples from when I was at General Mills. How big should they be? How much capacity, meaning how much storage and how much throughput, how fast can they get product out the door? How much should that do? If you're talking about a manufacturer or even with a distribution center, what types of products should be put in those facilities? So for example, if you go into a Target, you can see that there's things like clothing and electronics that can go through just a standard uh, ambient temperature warehouse that doesn't really have temperature control. But you also have things like milk and eggs and cheese, and that has to go through a refrigerated warehouse. And then you have things like frozen pizza, frozen vegetables, that has to go through a frozen warehouse. And so those are actually separate supply chains, and you need to design your network in accordance with the demands for those temperature channels and where your demand is geographically. Some other questions are around inventory. So for example, how much of a product should I stock in my store or in my warehouse to both satisfy my customer demand, but not also hold too much inventory, because inventory ultimately is money tied up in physical form. And so you want to have a trade-off between having enough to satisfy your customers' demands, but not having too much where you're unnecessarily tying up money in that sense. For the last several years, I worked at Target. I was working on what's called last mile network design. So inside the e-commerce realm, how do we design e-commerce networks to ensure fast delivery to the customers, Target calls them guests, of their e-commerce packages in a way that is both highly convenient to that customer, but also cost effective and makes sense from the business side of it. So those are some of the big things in supply chain design and supply chain optimization, but it goes way past that one.
It does, I'm sure. I wanted you to talk a little bit about it because I think that supply chain is a super data-driven field that kind of gets ignored by people when they're looking to move into data. And you didn't start in data, right? You moved into supply chain. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sort of market or maybe advice that you've seen for people who are shifting into data and what they might be able to do, because there's a lot of data jobs that we see that are like, we think of prediction only, or we think of inferential statistics only. And supply chain is a little bit different in that it's optimization, right?
Yeah, well, nice thing about supply chain, and this will touch a little bit on your data question, is that depending upon what you're interested in, both from an analytical perspective and from just a career trajectory perspective, supply chain offers a lot of opportunities. So if you are in the data visualization space, there's a great market for people who want to focus on BI, diagnostic analytics within supply chain. If you're more in the forecasting and the predictive space, that's a huge market, right? Because we need to predict how much demand the product is going to be. We need to predict how much how much activity we're going to have in our warehouses or our plants, so we know how to staff appropriately. Now, if you go into more of the prescriptive things like operations research and optimization, there's plenty of work there and some of the things I spoke to before. So one of the awesome things about supply chain as a data field is that there's something for everybody. And if you're more on the data engineering side too, supply chains run on data. Supply chains generate data left, right, and center. Whether or not the organizations are aware of that or using it, it's there. And so there's opportunity there, and it's an awesome field if you are somebody that is both interested in the analytical technical side, but also interested in solving real world problems that actually matter to people. And that's something was a real draw to me initially and continues to be a draw for me.
I agree. I feel like everyone is affected by the supply chain, no matter who they are. You can't escape it. And it's a way to touch a lot of lives. I see a great question, George, in the chat. Would you like to ask that?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So can you hear me okay, by the way? I'm trying out a new microphone.
Yeah, you're all right.
Yeah, I was curious about how COVID-19 may have impacted what you do, especially because, and I think a lot of fields are going through this, where all of our kind of ho-hum stats, like our dashboards and everything, which had variation in it, just kind of went really crazy. I'm in HR, and we had just crazy turnover. And so I'm just kind of wondering, did you anticipate any of that? How did you adjust to the changes that we saw in COVID-19?
That's a great question. I think that I'll answer the second part first. I think that, of course, COVID-19 and not so much the disease itself, but rather and the epidemic itself, but rather the actions associated with preventing it. So things like um, social distancing. That means that if you're working in a manufacturing plant, you're usually working pretty close to each other. Right now, you can't, which means you're working more slowly, right? Or things like we saw with the port backups because of a whole lot more ships coming from East Asia into the Southern California ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. So a lot of these things we saw during COVID-19, I think, are somewhat unique in the sense that we had a intersection point of multiple major disruptions to global supply chains from both a supply side and a demand side. And that is probably not going to happen to that level of magnitude in my lifetime again. At least I hope not. Um, and so the question then is, what are the lessons we should learn from it going forward? I think there's a lot of discussions, and I've been in them around when we look at, say, 2020 through 2022 from a demand perspective. Do you just take the actuals, or do you smooth that out, and do some sort of interpolation because you don't want to necessarily just use the history as a prediction of what's going forward? Um, More broadly, there's a lot of discussions around supply chain leaders around what do we do with our supply chains going forward. There's you can read the news about geopolitical tensions and the impacts to specifically things like critical supply chains around semiconductors. There's a lot of news coming out of the White House around that, and so there's a lot of discussions about how to handle these things. I don't think anybody has the right answer, and frankly, the right answer for you and your company is going to be different than even another company in your same industry, much less a different industry.
Thank you. Big, huge answer to an maybe unanswerable question. Ralph, I have a question about your decision to strike out on your own, because I feel like there are a lot of people right now, including me in the past couple of years, who have thought maybe I could freelance, maybe I could do consulting. So I'm wondering what your decision process was like. How did you know it was time to go out on your own?
Yeah, great. So I really enjoy the problem solving component of this type of work, and that was what I really liked about my corporate job. And I was talking with a friend of mine. I said, "Hey, I really enjoy this, but I'm kind of doing less of it as time goes on." And he said, "Well, have you thought about consulting?" And this was pre-COVID, and at that point, most consulting firms were traveling, 4 days a week, and young family not really interested in that. Then when COVID struck, everybody's work from home for the most part. I thought, this seems like a real great time to kind of strike out and start my own company. And if things don't work out, I can go back to work at a quote unquote real job eventually. So in terms of what I did and what I would give as advice, don't do it on a lark. Don't just wake up and say, "Man, I don't like my job. I'm done with this," and go from there. You need to do a lot of preparation. So one of the things that people tend to not necessarily realize when they're working in a real job is like how much of a support structure is associated with that job you have. So they're paying your half of your taxes, like they are, at least on the Medicare and the Social Security side. They're providing your health insurance, maybe in your retirement plan. If you're on your own, like you're on your own, that's all yours. So you got to think about how are you going to have a business entity? Are you going to find clients? What kind of work are you going to do? Um, and then how are you going to address things like health insurance, and all those other things that, for the most part, are just kind of given to you when you start a job. And I can go into any detail on any of those, but broadly, that's kind of what I would say.
Thank you. I will leave people in the chat to ask nosy questions. I saw a question in Slido, which was, with the increasing amount of data available, how do you make sure that insights derived are actionable and are not overwhelmed by noise or irrelevant information?
Ooh, that is a great one. I think that, yeah, as data becomes more and more available, it does give us the temptation to think that I can just get a little bit more detail, or I just need a little bit more and I can make a little bit better decision. I think something that is a characteristic that was imbued to me in the military and then really kind of crystallized by my teaching and operations research is understand what are the prime movers. Like, what are the biggest things that matter the most? And what are the things that, if they are different, would change your decision? And if they aren't different, would change your decision? And so it's helpful to just say, if this thing we're tracking, if it was higher or lower, would we make a different decision? And if so, how big of a magnitude would that decision be differently? Because if it's not going to be that big of a difference, then it's not going to change what you would be doing. And if it's not going to change what you'd be doing, you don't need to pay that close of attention to it. I think that's the biggest thing. And that's going to be, of course, context dependent. What that means for a retail supply chain is going to be different from a consumer packaged goods supply chain, which is going to be different from any other sector.
Yeah, man, some of these questions, I feel like full disclosure, I did supply chain in my undergrad, so I'm fascinated by the stuff that Ralph is working on, but my head is kind of spinning on what I could have done if I had gone into supply chain full time. There are so many unique questions to answer. I see a question in the chat from Jonathan. Would you like to unmute and answer that or ask that one?
Yeah, thanks. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So my question to you is, given the exponential age of data, do you see any fundamental issues with data management and governance in your line of work? And if so, could you give any concrete examples of that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's definitely an issue. I mean, any supply chain, you have to have a real emphasis upon data management, data governance, even though it's not always the most flashy of disciplines, for sure. That was never really my space. I mean, I worked with the people who worked in that space, but it was never something I was particularly close to in terms of the day-to-day. So unfortunately, I can't give too many examples about that.
That's all right. Totally valid answer. I have a question. I've heard you talk before about marketing yourself, and you talked a little bit about like, how do you find people when you're striking out on your own? Can you talk a little bit about what advice you would give job seekers around marketing themselves, whether they're new grads or switching industries?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so if you're looking to switch industry, new grad, I would say the biggest thing is find a tagline and lean into it. So what do I mean by a tagline? I'm going to say something completely unrelated to supply chain. Say, hi, my name is John Smith, and I'm looking for a position in marketing analytics in the greater Denver area. Okay, that's a tagline. What does that do? That now gives somebody three hooks that they can get in, they can help you. Now, maybe, or either help you or refer to others. So somebody says, hey, I'm looking for marketing analytics positions in Denver. Well, I know somebody in marketing, right? Most people know somebody in marketing. I'm going to introduce you to that person in marketing. Or, oh, Denver, my cousin lives there. Maybe he knows somebody that's in the more marketing space locally. It gives you something that allows you, maybe not that first person that you talk to is probably not going to be the one say, wow, I have been looking for you my whole life. Here's a job. What they're going to do is they're going to give you those second, third, fourth connections. And you need to give those people something to help you with. What doesn't help is saying, hi, I'm willing to do any job. Like, I don't know how to help you then. And so find that tagline, lean into it. And then something that I read early on in my career, and I think this is very helpful, is to say that if you want to have like an extraordinary career, there's two ways to do it. One is to be like the absolute best in the world at something, which vast majority of us are not going to be, right? It doesn't matter how much you like singing or playing basketball, you're probably not going to be LeBron James or Taylor Swift. There's not that many people at the tippy top of any field. But pick two or three things that are independently valuable, aim to be in the top quartile of each of those, and now suddenly you have that kind of unique skill set. So, I mean, it's honestly not that hard to be in the top 25% of anything. I would guess that by being on this call, everybody here is in the top 25% of data analytics across the entire population, probably significantly higher for most of you. So now commit yourself to learning supply chain or marketing or finance or whatever it is and get better at that. So now you have that intersection point. That's something that I would highly recommend. And it goes kind of that tagline as well.
I so totally agree with this. I just want to like add my agreement to it, because when I first started freelancing, I either didn't get work or didn't get the right work for a long time. And I was telling people, I can do anything in XYZ. And until I started telling people, here is exactly what I do and what I want to do, I just wasn't getting any traction. But once I started putting that out there, everybody that I talked to, I said, hey, this exactly is what I want to do. The opportunities started popping up way, way, way more. And I also kind of almost want to call out Mark, who's on this call right now, Mark Reiki, because Mark, I know you were on my podcast with me, and you said that you were at the gym with a friend and you told them what you wanted to do. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, that was when, so I used to work as a mechanical engineer back in the day. And I worked in Houston. And in 2020, when the world shut down, Houston, lots of people were job seeking because Houston runs on energy. And so I was trying to make a change. And me and one of my friends at the gym were like just chit chatting about like what we were looking to do next. And my friend's wife happened to overhear that. And she said, oh, like you're like a nerd who likes doing numbers stuff. We're hiring. And I said out loud to her, like, I don't think I'd be a good fit, but it's worth it giving it a shot. And it turned out it was a really good fit. But yeah, it just, I guess like to your point, Libby, it's we were like chit-chatting about like, I don't know, the very niche areas where we wanted to do our career pivots, and just someone happened to overhear that and say like, hey, I've got an opening that like fits that specific thing you're looking for.
Yeah, and it may be kind of old school. Something I would actually, if you're looking, in the job seeking, make business cards for yourself that are independent of your company, and they're cheap. You can get 250 business cards for less than $30. I just did that at Office Depot, and be like, here's my name, here's the thing I'm looking for. And now when you meet this person, it's not like, oh, I met that guy at the gym. Nothing against you, Mark, right? Like what was their name? Well, I got their card. Hopefully,
Yeah, I haven't seen a business card in a while. But I guess the point is talk to people about what you want. Tell them what you want, because they won't know unless you tell them. I remember you recommending a book to me at some point, Ralph, and I can't remember what it is, but I would love you to talk about it, because I know that it had to do with preserving optionality.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually made a list of book recommendations, so I'm glad you narrowed it down a little bit with the preserving optionality. Yeah, so if anybody here is a fan of Nassim Taleb, he wrote the Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness, he wrote a couple other books, and one of his principles is what's called preserving optionality, which is essentially to say you can make decisions, and you should, but keep other doors open, keep the options open. So, if you take a kind of a hybrid approach to your career, if you're pursuing supply chain analytics, well, you could, if you don't like that niche, you could probably make an option of going into another component of analytics or more of a business side job of supply chain. It's always about try to focus your career into something that is valuable and where you will be very valuable, but give yourself outs if you need to make a move, whether for whatever reason. So.
Awesome. I'm going to have to put that in my resources. Christine, I see you asked a question in the chat. Would you like to ask it live?
Yeah, so first of all, this is the first time I've finally made it to the data science hangouts that have been on my calendar for months.
Welcome.
And I think it's because I've followed Ralph a bit over time and been excited about the work that you do in supply chain. So kind of a confluence of things to finally get me here. But really curious, now that you've done this independent consulting work and that you've had these corporate careers, where do you think the most value comes from? If it's potentially like individual contributors who are exceptional, either consultants or team members, or if it's having a fully resourced department that has a lot of organizational credibility.
I'm going to say yes. I think both are true. And the reason why I say is because even if you have people who are working for you who are just extremely talented in a field, they're not going to be very effective without other good teammates of either within their group and across the company. And they're not going to be effective if they don't have the technical resources available to you. You can take the most talented data scientist in whatever field, and if they can't access a database or they can't talk to the person in an adjacent department that they need to work on the projects, they're not going to be effective, right? And we see this in team sports, right? Even the best individual contributor players are nothing unless they have otherwise also excellent teammates with them.
Speaking of excellent teammates, Rachel, you had a question.
Yeah. Ralph, I loved when you were talking about like finding your tagline and leaning into it. And I've just been so impressed by the marketing that you do and seeing all of your content on LinkedIn and your blog posts. And I was curious, how did you learn all the different parts of running a business? Like going from having one specific function within a big company to doing everything on your own?
Well, I thought about it a long time and did a lot of research before I resigned from Target to start my company. There's a lot of great resources out there if you're starting a company of any kind, whether it be consulting or if you're running a restaurant or whatever. And so there's a lot of really great business books out there. And so if you are wanting to start your own company, or whether there's two books I'd recommend. One is called The E-Myth Revisited. And unfortunately, I did not write the author down on my notes beforehand, but it's basically saying when you own your own business, like you have three separate personas that you need to inhabit. One is the visionary of where you want to be. One is the manager of who's doing the work of making sure day-to-day things are happening. And then one is the worker who's actually doing the things. And so you need to have all three together. And that was a shift for me. It took me a while to realize I need to have mentally these three gears in me every single day. Another great book, at least for consultants, is by a guy named David Fields, and it's called The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Getting Clients, I believe is the title. It's kind of self-explanatory what the title is about, but it talks a lot about independent consulting and the things of it. And in terms of just the nuts and bolts of it, a lot of great resources online, and there's all sorts of things you need to do, like set up an LLC, get separate bank accounts, get a website, get your own work email, things like that. So, but thankfully, once you do a lot of it one time, there's not a ton of maintenance after that.
Sort of. I feel overwhelmed by all the little things that I have to do. I'm like, oh, this is my job. Oh, that's my job. Oh, it's all my job. That's right. You don't get paid unless you send invoices, things like that. I see a question here for Michelle, and it's got an asterisk, so I'm going to ask it. And it's, did you have to convince your previous teams or your current clients to move past Excel? Our supply chain org is still heavily dependent on using Excel, but we're trying to move to more advanced analytics like Shiny apps, simulations, optimization, etc. Would love some advice on how you upskilled yourself and your teams out of Excel, I guess. And this is a really common question, even outside of supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, every supply chain and every company runs on Excel to a very, very large degree. And I would say, push where you can, but ultimately your goal should be just to add value to the company with whatever analytical approach you're doing. Now, I think that there's absolutely ways in which you can include some of those more advanced technologies and advanced methodologies that are complementary to how people are already working. Like, there's nothing to say that you can't make this really nice shiny dashboard that has these automated visuals and it's connected to the data stack so that it refreshes at every morning for people when they start working, and have it where people can take the data and do additional work in Excel. Those things aren't necessarily in conflict. Now, sometimes people try to take Excel too far and do things that it was not designed to do, for sure. But I don't think that it's necessarily that you need to feel like you're in opposition against how other people are working.
I have a question that we kind of ask everybody. I already asked you part of this one, but I'm wondering if you have anything else. What is a piece of career advice that either you received or a piece of career advice that you've given that's been really helpful or made an impact?
Shoot. I mean, the biggest thing is just try to lean into something that you are very good at. I don't know if anybody here has heard of Scott Galloway. He's kind of a public intellectual, but he just wrote this book called The Algebra of Wealth. And he's a very social media savvy guy. And one of his taglines is pursuing your passion is don't pursue your passion, pursue your strengths, and the passion will come. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom to that. I think that when you take us on a self-assessment of what nascent talent you have and how you can nurture that to make yourself commercially valuable in the marketplace, you'll start to like your job more. Like, we can all think of things, whether work-wise or otherwise, where we just didn't have any talent for it and you didn't enjoy it, right? But you think of things that you had some talent for and you got better and you're like, oh, I like seeing the self-development. I like how other people interact with me positively because they see good work in me. And then you start getting passionate for things because you get good at it, not the other way around necessarily. So that's a piece of advice that I think is underappreciated, but has definitely worked for me.
I like that, especially because sometimes I think following your passion or trying to monetize your passion can kind of kill your passion.
Oh yeah, I love running, and I was looking at my Athlinks profile recently, and I realized that Athlinks, for those who don't know, it's basically a website that tracks your performance in different running races. And even my best marathon would be charitably described as a good hobby runner. It's like I would not describe myself as anywhere near where I could make a living off it. So
I see a question that was way back in the chat, which was kind of for everyone, and it was from Marlene. Marlene, would you like to talk about that and ask that to the group and to Ralph? It was about knowledge management, I think.
Yeah, this came up recently in good morning, everyone, or afternoon. I don't know what time zone you're in, but hello, everyone. Yeah, this recently came up. I'm new to my organization. I've been with my organization for 3 months, and of course, as the newbie, I come on board and start asking all like the humdrum background questions. So I'm like, hey, where do I find metadata documentation for this? They'll refer to a database design decision that was made maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Like, oh, where do you keep that? And they have a couple of ways they kind of manage this information. And I just asked them, hey, do you mind if I ask around the coolest group I know and see what other companies do and try to, just revisit how that happens. So yeah, Ralph, that's probably my big question is maybe either currently what do you recommend as a consultant, or what have you done with Target or previous employers to manage those kind of big data decisions and the like of metadata?
Ooh, that is a great question. Fortunately, not really my area. Did interact with some of the people who are doing metadata work. I think that just from a broader perspective, metadata and knowledge management is everybody's job, to the extent that if you find issues, you should bring it up with people. If you look and say, we have things that our data says that our warehouse is in Georgia and the latitude and longitude associated with it is in Utah. okay, there's a problem, right? Like we all got to bring this up. But most the large organizations I've been with, and most of them that I work with, do have people who are dedicated to master data management and knowledge management as their full-time job, and that's not just something I'm dealing with.
Thanks.
I kind of wonder how you do knowledge management for yourself as a business person, as a small business person, because I use Notion for everything. And if I didn't have everything in Notion, I think that I would lose my mind and not be able to run my own solo business. Do you have anything that you use for small business?
Yeah, so of Google Workspace, so that's great for most documentation, storage, and things like that. Have a CRM, so I use HubSpot as a CRM, which is you can get free version of HubSpot, and that works quite fine for me. And you can just add on plans as you want to. Those are the two big ones.
HubSpot, okay. I see some other Notion people out there and OneNote. Maybe some other people can put suggestions in the chat for me on ways that you keep track of things. I see a question from Mark. Mark, would you like to ask that?
Yeah, sure. This is kind of back on the topic of consulting and finding your own clients, but how do you determine it's a good problem to have, but how do you determine which clients to accept and which to turn away? Like, what does that process look like for intake?
That's a great question. So oftentimes it comes down to, what are their objectives? What are their goals? So sometimes individuals will come to me with what I would consider to be more traditional supply chain consulting, in which case I am definitely not the best people to do it, but I know great people that I can refer them to and get them towards those individuals. One of the principles that I go by is that I want anybody that I talk to that is interested in services, I want to make sure that they get to somebody who will help them and help them in a way that they need, right? And that might be me, it might not be me. And so to the level that I feel like I can comfortably give them what they should be looking for and what they're asking about, we'll take that in and scope from there. But sometimes they need something that is outside of my core offerings, and I'm going to give that referral to somebody who I know will help take care of them.
Does it ever go through a kind of discovery phase and then you come to the realization at the end of well, maybe I'm not the best fit for you, or your research question isn't defined, or I guess there's a lot of I've seen other people discuss all these different avenues that pop up when doing consulting work. I'm wondering if you've seen the same sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And sometimes, yes, people, what they're seeking might be here, but what their core problem is might be here, right? So in sales training, you're taught to seek for the need behind the need. And so, for example, if I say, I need to go to McDonald's right now, is the need that I need McDonald's, or is the need that I'm hungry? Or is the need that I'm anxious and I really like ice cream? So there's a couple different levels behind what somebody says they might be wanting right now and what actually will satisfy the core problem. And so part of discovery process is sometimes individuals oh, we're really looking to do this type of project. It's very direct. And sometimes it's a little bit more just unknown at the beginning, and we got to talk through and get down to the point where maybe I'm good for that and my team is good for that. Maybe somebody else is.
Thank you.
I like that question, Mark, because that's when I first started freelancing. That was a big problem for me. I accepted work that maybe wasn't the right fit for me out of anxiety, a sense of scarcity. Oh, this project has come along. I better say yes to it, because if I say no to it, what's going to happen? I think getting over that and trusting that the right stuff is coming, and if I say no to the wrong stuff, it opens up space for the right stuff, was really, really helpful. It's scary, but it's doable.
Yeah, opportunity costs are real, and you don't necessarily know it until you spend your time on something you shouldn't be, and then you realize you can't on something you should be spending your time.
Libby, do you mind if I ask a follow-up question to that?
Go ahead. Absolutely.
Ralph, so are there ever projects where you feel like the discovery, or there's so much ambiguity with the project or the data or what the client really needs that maybe you consider something like a pre-project where a client might pay you to do a more robust like discovery or data due diligence type of process. Is that something that you see in the independent consulting space or not really?
Yes, there's definitely cases where, particularly if it's a brand new client, may not have an idea of what their data circumstances are. They might not be fully informed what their data circumstances are. And so I might propose saying, well, we could do this very, very large thing. Make sure I got both my hands in the camera. Do a very, very large thing here. But let's do something staged. And I'll say, let's propose doing this. It's going to be shorter. It's going to be of a lower cost. And then if you are satisfied with those answers, great. Otherwise, if you want to expand on it, then we can kind of roll that into a larger project. And that gives the time to understand more of the data layout and some of the complexities of what they may be facing.
That makes sense.
I love that. Does that help, Javier? Yeah. My wheels are turning as you're asking that question. Just having discovery as a product, maybe like even if I'm not the one who helps you, maybe I could help you figure out which direction you need to go in.
Yeah, absolutely. And when supply chain, sometimes the small jobs are the most effective just to kind of give people direction. Like, so maybe the question might be, somebody might call up and say, Ralph, I'm looking at where our distribution centers are, and I really think we need one in the Southeast. We don't have one in the Southeast. I'm really thinking, can you help me give some directions on what we should be doing that? And you can do that kind of work relatively quickly without necessarily too much data, without necessarily too much time or sophistication. And the answer might be, yes, you really should be looking in these 2 or 3 states. Or it should be, no, you don't. And if the answer is, okay, well, can we go a little bit more detailed so I'll know what metro area to look in? Then that becomes a more detailed project. Oftentimes, supply chain executives need just something directional to start with, and then to make maybe a near-term decision, and then that would lead into maybe a larger analysis for a bigger decision.
Is that something that you would use simulation for? Or is that more of like a high level qualitative research type of thing?
It's mostly using optimization, mixed integer linear programming to be precise for those who are in the, yep, OpenSolver, I see that in the chat. That's a good one. Yeah, and then you can make that more complex. And there's qualitative components to it. Maybe there's certain characteristics of one metro over another that would make it more desirable from an operational perspective.
Awesome. I feel like we could all kind of share in the chat any resources that we know for solving stuff. There are open source solvers, like Jared said, but then there are also some proprietary ones that are a little bit more expensive, but really, really powerful. I have a Slido question here that's how much overlap is there in supply chains across different sectors, such as like private, government, public?
Ooh,
And that one does that need more context or does that
yeah,
help?
I would appreciate some more
Okay.
clarification on that.
It's a Slido question, so I will allow someone to give any extra if they want to. But let me see if I get any more Slido information and I'll let you know. I have a question from Luke. Luke, are you available to ask a question? He said, as a freelancer, how do you make the quote unquote unseen hours seen by people who don't work in data? I've had enough trouble getting across why X ask isn't as straightforward as they assume with folks I actually see. So when someone asks you for something and they think it's going to be simple and it's not.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, this is probably a good lesson just in general for anybody working in this field, whether consulting or in the corporate world. To a certain extent, I'm fortunate in that part of my job is making estimates and providing statements of work and proposals and things like that, and that involves what we think will take the time, and that's sometimes can be a tricky conversation. A lot of great resources. That David Fields guy I referred to his book. He talks about this quite a bit on his in his books and on his websites. But it often comes down to what's the trust level between you and your client? Like your client should be coming to you because they trust that you're going to be able to solve a problem and you have the expertise and the experience and the know-how to do this and do this in a way that is expeditious but still good, and so they should have that trust that you're going to give them a reasonable estimate of it and then communicate if you were wrong about it.
That's a tough question. I feel like across the board for everybody. If anybody has any suggestions for making your work, making the process and how long things take visible to other people, I would love to know. I think one answer there is just relationship building, right? Like make friends with people and let them know what you do and become sort of like interested in their process as well. And I think that can really, really help. I see a question from Rachel here. Rachel, would you like to hop in and ask? It's so weird saying that to you.
Yeah, I was just muting somebody. I think accidentally came unmuted. Sorry. I was wondering, Ralph, for a company that doesn't have a dedicated supply chain team yet, or maybe isn't using analytics for supply chain, what do you think would be a good entry point for them?
Most companies, the vast majority, and even I'm talking big companies too, vast majority of analytics work is going to be in the BI and descriptive space. And so if you are, say, employed as a supply chain analyst, that's your title, or logistics analyst, or a program manager, it doesn't necessarily need to be a data type project. Okay, well, what are the things that I'm being asked about? What are the things that my manager and my teammates are being asked about that we don't have an easy way to answer? And can I make a way that is easier to answer through? Even if it's Excel based, that's fine, right? Or through something like a Shiny app or a dashboard that you send out. Show that there's value in this kind of work, and then as you show that, it's kind of like show what you're worth and kind of build up the case to be doing more to it, and then maybe adding people and technical resources to enable more of that.
Thank you.
All right, I have a question from Slido. What should people do who fell into data jobs in government without a math or computer science degree, but see a gap for what's required in jobs and industry? Should they go for more schooling?
I will start off by saying I'm not unfamiliar with kind of how the government jobs component works to it. I mean, I would say I would not encourage people to necessarily go for more schooling until they've exhausted other options. I mean, I don't think necessarily if you work experience trumps most things, most education, and if you can show that I've been able to apply this kind of data analysis to my current role, that's going to generally, I think, have more credence than necessarily saying, oh, and I went back to school to get another degree in this space.
I think I would agree.
It all comes down to networking and talking to people, right? You don't want to be somebody's. It's very helpful that if your first interaction with somebody is not asking them for a job or at an interview table or something like that.
Yep, I would agree. I think that it's great that there are options out there for going back, but I know that I went and got my master's degree, and I very quickly found out that I think experience was so much more valuable to anybody who I was applying for a job with than just my master's degree was, right? I have a question from Slido again, which is, how is navigating your career growth as an IC opposed to management?
That is a really great question. I mean, I think it kind of just comes down to what are your objectives for your career? I mean, I think it's absolutely fine to say I want to be an IC and I want to be extremely knowledgeable and effective in this specialty that I'm working in. It's also fine to say I want to go into a managerial role and help guide others and move everybody towards a common goal. Both are fine. Both are necessary. I don't see as one better than the other. I think that if you do want to stay in kind of an IC role, I think it's very beneficial to show that you are not just technically sound, but rather that you can clearly understand the businesses that you're supporting and their problems and their pain points, and how are you helping them move towards that. And you can do that even if you're in an extremely technical role. Like maybe you're a data engineer. Okay, well, you understand that this function, they really don't have good data sets that help them understand this subcomponent of their business. Okay, can you take that understanding and then orient your work and your team's effort maybe towards helping that? It's still technical work, but it's really oriented. And then it shows that you're truly understanding how these different functions work together towards the growth and effectiveness of the overall business.
Awesome. Thank you. There are a couple of little bits of experience in the chat, which are good to go look at. I think that it would be great. There are probably some people on the call who are supply chain folks and might not belong to a supply chain oriented community. Do you have one that you would recommend?
Yeah, that's great. So from professional organizations, and supply chain and data science, I try to keep feeding both, a couple hands too, like it's Twister. And so there's a few supply chain organizations that I would highly recommend you all join, at least one. One is CSCMP, Council for Supply Chain Management Professionals. The other is ASCM, the Association for Supply Chain Management. I have my local chapter water bottle here. And the third is the Institute for Supply Management, ISM. So wherever you live, there's probably a chapter for at least one of those, and just join and make it part of your professional growth to attend their functions. And you're going to meet people who maybe they're in data, maybe they've completely in the in the operational world, but you get to learn more about other companies, other functions, and really commit yourself to improving your knowledge and experience in the supply chain side of the job.
Awesome. Thank you. I see some URLs going in the chat. I was wondering if in organizations you notice that supply chain people and data people, like people in data science and analytics, are separate from each other, or do they work closely together?
Well, it's a great question. I think it depends upon company by company, and even to an extent what kind of data job they're doing. So in my corporate roles and even some of the companies I'm consulting with, you do see data and analytics as a separate division from supply chain. And then there might be a support role for business intelligence, some forecasting, things like that from the data side to the supply chain side. Other data people might be embedded within supply chain. So my corporate roles, all of them were embedded inside the supply chain. I think there's pros and cons for each, and it really does depend upon the job, but I do see it. Some companies are doing purely one, purely the other. Some are a hybrid. It's all over the place there.
Have you seen a benefit to one versus the other, embedded versus separate?
Yeah, the embedded is really beneficial for roles that have a lot of business facing and business impact. So like supply chain design, what I've done, that's essentially informing large scale decisions around the shape and nature of the supply chain. You got to be close to the people in the supply chain to understand the nuances of what you're modeling and what decisions you're doing. Other jobs, if you're doing like data engineering or even some BI work, it's probably better to be a little bit separate, simply because you want to be around a lot of people with similar technical skill sets to help you work through those problems. So I think that's kind of where it is. But there's going to be benefits on either side.
That makes sense. And as far as the organizations, did you mention Informs? Are you a member of Informs?
I am a member of Informs, yeah. So from the data side, I'm a Institute for Operations Research and Management Science. It's the big professional organization for operations research folks. I'm an Informs member and member of a couple like local data organizations here in Minneapolis.
Awesome. Yeah, Informs is great. And I wanted to put that out there. They also have local chapters, and there's a women's chapter, which is very unfortunately called WORMS, WORMS. But super, super like great thing to be a part of, especially if you are a student and you're moving from like, school world into the real world and you want to be a part of the ORMS, but also business analytics. There's a whole business analytics section of Informs, and they have their own conference. So anybody here who's in business intelligence or business analytics, there's also a place for you in Inform. So I would highly recommend checking it out.
Yep, and the Inform's annual meeting is in 2 or 3 weeks in Seattle.
It is, yeah.
So those who might be going, I will not, but it's good if you're in the area. Look it up.
Yeah. Well, I noticed I missed a question from Jared earlier, which is what is your favorite ERP and supply chain solution? I don't know what ERP is.
Ooh, I'm going to punt on this one because I don't want to give too many misinformed hot takes on that. So an ERP is enterprise resource planning, which is basically a large software solution that's meant to manage and plan the day-to-day of your supply chain. Yeah, especially with 4 minutes left, I don't want to get too deep into that one. So.
No worries. Well, I had another one from Slido that I think I missed as well, which is as an independent consultant, you're out on your own. What strategies do you have to keep your skills and your knowledge up to date?
Yeah, it's a great question. So part of it is just you learn as you go, right? And as you take on new clients and maybe new industries or new types of problems that you may never seen before, there's going to be a learning there. But the biggest thing, and this is just broadly advice, is just read a ton. I would say that if you are not committing yourself to some level of professional reading every day, or at least a few times a week, you're probably going to be falling behind. And so, especially if you're like maybe moving into the business world, you can get a ton of information just from reading old textbooks, that are cheap or free online, reading the business section of the local newspaper every single day. If you're reading, like for new clients, I will always read their 10K, their annual report, prior to our initial call, because that tells you a lot about what their business looks like and some of the challenges they're facing. Like literacy is a great thing, right? It makes the world's wisdom available to you right away. So highly recommend that. I
love that. And Luke Morris is in the chat saying, support local news. And I agree. Well, I think that we had one more question, but I don't know if we can fit it in 2 minutes. And it's about Shiny from Rachel. How do you use Shiny?
Oh, I am a big believer in Shiny. So generally, as part of our offerings in a project, we'll say, hey, at the end, we want to put a Shiny app of the results so that, we'll give you a PowerPoint presentation and things like that. But you're going to want more details. You're going to want to have specific questions. So here's this thing that you can look through, look at the details, and it's very well received. Huge fan of Leaflet for mapping, and then and all the different solutions for tables and things like, and graphics within ggplot, and then pop it up on shinyapps.io. It's very, very straightforward to do that. And then,
awesome.
Just give logins to the clients.
Yes, lots of votes for Shiny in the chat. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ralph. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. We will see you all next Thursday, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.